O Fronteiras do Pensamento apresenta a primeira parte da conferência com o historiador e antropólogo Carlo Ginzburg. Ele fala sobre as transformações ocorridas na vida do homem devido à revolução tecnológica e faz um alerta para o novo tipo de leitura que se desenvolveu paralelamente à internet. Confira.
It's a great honor to be here. Everyone uses the internet. I do too. Everyone speaks about the internet. I do too. On such a topic, the risk of being banal is rather high. I have decided to run this risk because the huge technological revolution that has taken place beneath our very eyes and that has profoundly modified our existence, even in the most trivial aspects of daily life, must be dealt with directly and analyzed in terms of its implications. I will try to give a minimal contribution in this direction by focusing on one case, which I shall be using to illustrate the general theme stated in the title. But first of all, I should point something out. The word history, historia, has two meanings, both in Italian and in Portuguese, connected yet distinct. That is, it designates both a literary genre, comprising essays or history books, and the subject of this literary genre, the historical process. I will speak of both, obliquely, of how the internet affects both the way of reading and writing history and on the way of experiencing the historical process. In the end, I will also make a passing mention of the third meaning of the term, history or historia in the sense of narrative, either truthful or invented. As we know, a language such as English differentiates between one and the other, between history and story. Italian and Portuguese don't. Whoever does the job of the historian knows that the internet has modified and facilitated many aspects of research. I will start from the most obvious. Let's say that I come across a quotation, a few words in any language, whose source is unbeknown to me. If I go to Google and transcribe those words, I might be able to identify the source. Of course, the words must not be overly trivial. Also, they must be part of a text or several texts that, for some reason or other, have been uploaded onto the web. But the number of texts uploaded, even not deliberately, for instance, they may have been cited in a text of an altogether different kind, is amazing high. During a piece of research, I come across the name of a character, not necessarily a famous one. I search on Google and, generally by means of the omnipresent Wikipedia, I find a biography with the possible addition of bibliographic references. Here, the first objection arises, the errors. It is indeed true. Very often the Wikipedia entries do contain errors. More in general, on the internet, as is well known, we can find anything, falsities, trash, infamies, mixed up with true and proper gems. Precious information, masterpieces in unabridged version, made available to one and all, are mixed up with complete and utter junk. How can we learn to choose the gems in the midst of all the junk? How will a boy or girl who is learning to do research manage to get his or her bearings in a muddle of that sort? I'd started off from some obvious consideration, and almost right away I've bumped into a very serious obstacle. Someone has written that the internet is a democratic instrument. Taken to the letter, this statement is false. I would correct this by adding, it is a potentially democratic instrument. Right now, the motto of the internet is encapsulated in the politically incorrect words of Jesus. Whoever has will be given more. Matthew 13, 10, 12. Instead of reducing the distances tied to the social hierarchy, the internet exacerbates them. To carry out research by surfing the web, we need to know how to master the instruments of knowledge. In other words, we need to dispose of a cultural privilege that, as I can say on the grounds of my own personal experience, is, as a rule, tied to social privilege. Schools need the internet, but the internet needs a school where real teaching is going on. The internet not only back references to books, but presupposes books. Here, someone might put forward this objection. But what difference is there between a page of a book read on a computer screen and a page of printed paper? By way of principle, none, even if someone, as I shall be saying later on, is of different opinion. But the book here is a metaphor. It is the instrument that teaches us to master the extraordinary speed of the internet. In order to be able to use it, you need to learn to read slowly. The definition of philology, according to Nietzsche, philologist before becoming a philosopher. Slow reading is philology within everyone's reach. Whoever has learned to ruminate for an hour on a phrase or on a word may venture without too many risks into the vertigo of the internet. I'm unable to imagine, to image the inverse trajectory. I will say more too. I cannot imagine that someone might learn alone without models the practice, which is profoundly artificial, of slow reading. Hence, the internet, in order to be used adequately, let's say according to 1/1,000,000th of its power, presupposes not only the books, but also those who teach to read books, that is, teachers in flesh and blood. But how much of Google is really new beyond its super powerful technology? Several historians have asked themselves this question. First of all, Roger Chartier, who apart from being a professor at the Collège de France and chairman of the scientific board of Bibliothèque Nationale de France, is perhaps the foremost historian dealing with the history of the book and the history of reading. I've known Chartier for many years. We have often discussed matters related to our respective research. At times, we have been in agreement, at others, we have not. In either case, I've learned a lot. Chartier has repeatedly dealt with the Google book search, which has led to the numerizing of whole public libraries. Million upon million of books, a number that could dilate so far as to include, in theory, all the books, past, present, and future. In his comments, Chartier has energetically stressed the doubts of a legal and political nature engendered by the privatization of public goods by a private company that operates under monopoly or quasi-monopolistic conditions. He has argued that, on the one hand, Google induces a fragmentary reading, which isolates fragments of texts, sentences, words. On the other, it erases the specificity of the material media in which the texts had always been inscribed, transferring them onto a single medium, that is, the computer screen. In both cases, Chartier claims, something important is lost, which for millennia has been part of the age-old story inaugurated by writing. The invention that the anthropologist Jack Goody has called the Great Divide, the great watershed in the history of humankind. Let's look at this dual loss close up and try to understand what it consists of and whether it is really such a novelty after all. I will start from the first point, the fragmented reading. It's true. Google allows us to take possession of fragments of texts, sentences, single words, without obliging us to read the texts they belong to in their integrity. And yet, this fragmented reading has always been part of anyone's reading. Of course, Chartier knows this very well, so well that he speaks of the multiple nature of reading. I might add that reading, an activity today shared by most of humankind, not by everyone, is also a far more complex activity than its theorizations. Google helps us to trace a word back within a text that perhaps we had never read or whose existence we were even quite unaware of. But as the historians know, the instruments for carrying out operations of that kind have existed for a long time. Indexes. In our tradition, they've been invented to read the book par excellence, the Bible. The Bible indexes were introduced in the 12th century in manuscripts that allowed university professors and preachers, though these were often the same people, to prepare lessons and sermons more rapidly based on themes, or as they were called, common beliefs, commonplaces. In this way, the fragments of Bible text produced a new literary genre and thus new textual totalities that Chartier has set against the Google fragment, which would remain a fragment and no more. But the latter objection does not seem to be decisive to me. In the 13th century, the concordances, which listed the words of the Bible in alphabetical order, a technique used for the first time in Papier's dictionary, themselves became an autonomous literary genre, a book destined to being used instead of being read. But isn't this also the principle that inspires Google? Naturally, among the possible uses of the concordances or of Google, there is also an integral and very intense reading of the text, of the Bible or any other book. One kind of reading does not exclude the others. Each one of us alternates them, not only depending on the type of text, but within the text itself. But also before the most ephemeral text, we can stop to reflect. And even the densest text is liable to what in French is called lecture diagonale, that is diagonal reading. In the light of these obvious considerations, I feel it is legitimate to put forward a thesis that perhaps cannot be wholly taken for granted, and that is that Google is an extension, a prosthesis of our body and our mind, a prosthesis capable of huge feats of which we should never be capable. Let us move now on the second of the discontinuities that, according to Roger Chartier, have supposedly been introduced by Google, the loss of the specificity of the material media upon which the texts have been inscribed. The forms, Chartier has stated, citing Don McKenzie, condition the text. The great danger of the numerization process is to lead us to suppose that a text is the same, irrespective of the form of its medium, unquote. In other words, a novel published as a feuilleton in a newspaper and a novel published as a self-standing volume are not the same thing, even if the same novel is involved, seeing that they are addressed to potentially different readerships affected by different expectations. But this truth, which Chartier, historian of the book and of reading, reminds us of, is a unilateral truth which coexists with a diametrically opposed truth, that for millennia the animal species we belong to has developed a capacity to extract from its material media a text that is at the same time both invisible and reproducible. This text, even before reading, is associated to the gesture of counting. Let's imagine a hunter who, after having killed two prey, marks two notches on a piece of wood with a sharp-edged stone, or a shepherd who, to mark the exit of two goats or two sheep from the fold, sets aside two pebbles. Both of them, the hunter and the shepherd, decide to ignore material data such as the size of the prey or the color of the livestock, so as to isolate a repeatable and invisible element, a number. This leap into the world of abstraction occurred for the first time millennia ago in only one culture, or in various cultures independent from one another, we shall likely never know. In any case, it amounted to a decisive turning point in the history of the human species, an event that has produced one of the tacit, invisible, irreplaceable premises of our being in the world. The present of the internet achieves a potential that sinks its roots in a very remote past. A reflection on history in the age of Google must start from this observation. It does not deny Google's novelty, but circumscribes it. It is not an absolute novelty. And the concentration of an enormous mass of data in the hands of a private company, which undoubtedly creates a very dangerous situation, is not unprecedented. Also, the invention of the printing press placed a huge mass of information in the hands of private individuals, and an instrument influencing public opinion previously unthinkable. The book was an instrument of control vis-à-vis increasingly numerous strands of the population, but it was also an instrument of liberation and subversion vis-à-vis the powers that be. Books, pamphlets, newspapers indelibly marked the Protestant Reformation, the First English Revolution, and the French Revolution. I said a short time ago that reading is an under-theorized operation. What's more, the possible uses of Google by its users, that is, the readers of this immense jumble of digital texts, is under-theorized. To make a step forward towards an adequate theory, we need empirical material duly analyzed. In other words, we need case studies. I will put one forward. I will begin with the Benandanti, published in 1966, which came out in Brazil in 1988 with the title Os Andarilhos do Bem. It was my first book. It is based on a series of trials held by the Inquisition Tribunal in Friuli, a region situated on the northeastern border of Italy, then part of the Republic of Venice, between the 16th and 17th centuries. At the heart of these trials, they were men and women who called themselves benandanti, that is, those who go for what is good. The inquisitors asked what this word meant, as they evidently didn't know it. The benandanti replied in abundant detail. For example, a young herdsman, Menichino dalla Tisana, interrogated in 1591, told that as he was born with a shirt on, he went 3 times a year like smoke in the meadow of Josaphat with the other benandanti to fight, quote, for faith against the witches, unquote. And, quote, when the benandanti win, he concluded, this was the sign of a good harvest. Rummaging through the trials, more than 1,000, preserved in large walnut cabinets, I found some 50 or so cases of benandanti, both men and women. I delved deep into their stories. They all said they were born with a shirt on, that is, wrapped in the fetal membrane. They would go out at night 3 or 4 times a year in the spirit, some transformed into a mouse or some other animal. After falling into a deep swoon of fighting in the spirit, armed with fennel branches, against witches and wizards armed with branches of sorghum, for the fertility of the fields, some, like Benichino, added for the faith. They would all say they went out by night in spirit as they were forced to, but some of them experienced this constriction as a condemnation, others with a sense of pride. Many told of the moment of initiation, which was marked by the apparition in dream of a benandante or, in some cases, of an angel.
Você assistiu a primeira parte da conferência com Carlo Ginzburg. Na próxima semana, assista aqui, na URGS TV, a segunda parte. Obrigada pela companhia e até a próxima!